Hello, dear friends. You can love a person even if you don't agree with him. No matter how many labels you put on him, you will never be able to classify him because Mr. Fernando Sánchez Dragó is unclassifiable. Opinion piece. Tribute to a genius. The last pre-Socratic. He never lost his smile. A man without labels. Shared Orientalism. He said, Europe is sinking. His erudition was overflowing. He denounced the age of Kali Yuga. Passion for occult sciences. Never tried to be like him. Taoism, Buddhism and Hinduism. He criticized materialistic scientism. Sánchez Dragó was extraordinary. His humankind was superior to his erudition. Let's start. I must confess that the death of the great Spanish writer Fernando Sánchez Dragó has upset my life, although I didn't want it to affect me. Before he died, I began to study him because I sensed his demise. I didn't want to mourn him, but I have mourned him several times because I can't help it, and because his books changed my vision of the world. This is my sentimental tribute to a genius. You love a writer when you read his books and enjoy them. I didn't agree with everything he said, but I loved the way he said it. With that affection, humankind and erudition, with which he argued his point of view, because he didn't shoot at the mind but at the heart. He never lost his friendly smile. Some media outlets have tried to dig up dirt on his life, which seems to be a low thing to do. Firstly, because one should never speak ill of the dead, and secondly, because who has not made a mistake in his life? I, a sinner, confess to God every day for my mistakes. A teacher was once asked what his life had been like, expecting him to tell wonders, but he humbly replied, mistake after mistake, because mastery is only achieved by learning from one's own mistakes. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. I didn't like him very much before I met him. I had a deplorable impression the first time. I met him personally in the 70s at a lecture he gave at the University College in Madrid, because he was drunk and I thought he was very incorrect. Later, I became interested in his books and was amazed by the wisdom of this great human being. My first trip to India was moved by his travel books, but my experience was very different from his. An experience of the banks of the Ganges in Varanasi, India, transmuted Sánchez Dragó's way of understanding the world. I also bathed in the Ganges, but I didn't have that luck, but rather the unpleasant sensation of stepping on dead people's bones. Differences. I have never tried to be like him because we are very different. He followed the path of the left hand, and I tried to follow the path of the right hand. He followed the path of excess that leads to wisdom, and I tried to follow the path of the middle ground of classical Greek and Buddha's teachings that leads to enlightenment. He followed the path of the Epicurean reveler, and I tried to follow the path of the ascetic, the hermit, the anchorite, the cenobite, and the penitent monk. However, there is something that united us very deeply, and that is the sincere search for the self, for the meaning of life, and the passion for Eastern philosophy. But I couldn't resemble him no matter how much I wanted to. He was an overflowing scholar, an enlightened perfectionist of knowledge, who has wisdom of everything human and divine. Such a baroque perfectionist and overloaded with wanting to know everything that it sometimes gave him neurosis and sometimes made me nervous to listen to him. I, on the other hand, try to simplify the words as much as I can, and I try to transmit this simplicity, which is not at all easy because the world is very complicated. I consider myself an heir to Quevedo's conceptism, Spanish Baroque literary style characterized by its conciseness, and the use of concepts or sharpness. Conceptionism is characterized by seeking an exact concision in expression that concentrates the maximum meaning in the fewest possible words, in such a way that even several meanings are concentrated. Affinity. Therefore, the affinity between human beings is not so much based on the fact that we think and live in the same way, but because there is a heart-to-heart communication. That is why I appreciate many people with whom I don't agree, but I see them as honest because they speak sincerely and convey a lot of humankind, a lot of humanity, I mean. But there are many things we did have in common apart of the love of Asia. His search for silence and solitude in a village far from the madding crowd, and their love of cats and other beings. I work a lot, and that weighs on me, because I wish I had more free time. But I don't have the capacity for work that he had, to be engrossed in a task almost 24 hours a day. He was a literary workhouse, and that led to great works and great successes. I, on the other hand, occasionally need to do something that relaxes me, like watching a film or reading a book, so that I don't end up going crazy from so much work. He claims that cats are his masters because they do not understand submission, are both alert and at rest, and watch over the sleep of children. He believes that they are psychopomp animals. It is to say that they can travel the passages to the beyond when they wish, and that they have the faculty, duty and vocation to guide human beings and perhaps other animals in their disincarnations. He suspects that writers may be the favorite animals of cats, as they like to sit at the pages, computer or typewriter beforehand, and watch the writer's fingers draw words from the depths of his mind. He wrote the short story Soseki, Immortal and Taiga, dedicated to his cat Soseki, who died in a domestic accident. After examining the circumstances surrounding the accident, Sánchez Dragó came to the conclusion that in order to save his granddaughter's life, Soseki decided to sacrifice his own. I too was traumatized by the accident death of one of my cats, so much so that I have since become a benefactor of stray felines. A spiritual seeker. Another thing that unites me with Don Fernando is the search for knowledge in the most exotic and distant sources, the search for the most hidden truth, for the secret of alchemy, for the teachings of the great enlightened masters. This passion has guided my life since childhood, since I searched and collect absurd and mysterious news like Charles Ford. But I could not travel as much as he did, because I need the cozy quiet of home as much as any self-respecting crab. The secret of the crab's immortality is that it walks sideways instead of straight ahead, because it doesn't seek direct confrontation. Don Fernando always went straight ahead and without complexes. That made him many enemies, but he didn't care. I, on the other hand, am more diplomatic because I don't like confrontation or tension with people. I am a peacemaker as well as a justice of the peace. I don't think it's necessary to use harsh words to convey information, because you can say the same thing without offending anyone. The great dragon thought, like Carl Gustav Jung, that life not lived is an illness that you can die of. Like Maria Zambrano, that there are things that cannot be said, but what must be written is what cannot be said. And he agreed with Ecclesiastes that the end of a thing is better than its beginning. Anti-system. Another thing that unites me with Don Fernando is rebellion against the system. For Sánchez Dragó, political correctness is a norm of Puritanism, and feminism has ensured that there are no Ariadnas left. He also criticized the fact that society lives in a perpetual adolescence. He understands that we live in an occultocracy and a British theocracy. His criticism of the Western world is radical. In the 18th century, the inhabitants of the West were deprived of ethical and aesthetic guidelines, and only myths provides essential guidelines for balanced development of human beings, when the sacred worldview of life, with Christian roots, was replaced by the rationalist conception from which atheism, Cartesianism, scientism, mechanicism, materialism, and brutal economicism predominate in most of the world. In his opinion, multiculturalism means the annulment of all values in the attempt to find new ones. If they come to tell us that the tam-tam of an African tribe is worth the same as Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, that is not a new value, it is a disvalue. In his opinion, the progressive destruction of the family, the natural sphere in which moral values are transmitted and personality is forged, with both parents absent from the home, it is forced to take children to school concentration camps from their very first years in order to robotize them, ship them, and transform them into submissive citizens who pass with their heads down through the slot of the ballot box and the ticket office of the Treasury. Orientalism. He himself defined himself as a man without labels. However, he has followed the path that has led him to spiritual Orientalism. The stance of life that he has acquired over the years can be summed up in the following words. I don't give a damn about social evolution. I am only interested in the spiritual, in what is inside us. Other people take care of the outside. I think the world has been in constant decline since the 6th century before Christ, and in any case, it hit rock bottom definitively in 1789. I am not a multiculturalist, but a cosmopolitan, which is the opposite. Multiculturalist relativism is a cultural genocide against all cultures, because it dissolves them in a gazpacho of sulfuric acid. I am not interested in changing things, but in deepening them. That was the first lesson that India passed on to me 40 years ago. The humankind never changes, but it can be wider, deeper, higher, more intense, and more extensive. That is my ideology. Close quotes. He defined his ideology as anarcho-individualist. His political thought is based on heterodox anarchism, made up of ideas taken from or attributable to very diverse currents: perennialism, shamanism, astrology, mysticism, hermeticism, mystical cults, Greek philosophy, especially pre-Socratic, Epicurean, Stoic, Cynic, and Hellenistic. Western. As a wave of anti-globalism sweeps across the old continent, his vision of Europe is pessimistic. Quotes, "Europe is sinking. It's a disaster. There is nothing to do. Europe will soon be the third world." On the emergence of new political blocs, in world history, there are telluric currents which, when their time comes, break through at breakneck speed, and there is no one to stop them. There was a millennium, he said, in the Mediterranean, the millennium of the nativity of the Greek Helot, of ancient Egypt. Then another millennium was that of the Atlantic, of the US, England, the colonial empires, and now comes the millennium of the Pacific. There are three great emerging blocs in the world. One is Russia, one is China and Southeast Asia, and the other is the Muslim countries. The latter are disunited among themselves, but the moment they unite, Europe will become a theme park, a museum. Totalitarianism. The writer understands that we are in the era of the Hindu Kali Yuga, a flabby totalitarianism in which there is only emptiness. Aldous Huxley's Happy Man, Happy New World. Ugliness elevated to the status of art, the suppression of the criterion of excellence and the corruption of language, demagogy and the rebellion of the rabble, the standard of egalitarianism, the emasculating leveling out of the ontological differentiation of the two sexes, the transformation of the freedom of the two sexes, and the transformation of freedom that of the transformation of freedom of thought into the inanity of thought, that of materialistic and reductionist scientism, that of the substitution of the real by the virtual, that of tweeters who believe they are Shakespeare, that of globalism that prostrates itself before the altars of holy consumption, that of mercantilism at all costs, that of political correctness at the New Inquisition. He claimed that Rousseau was the father of totalitarianism. That is why he disavowed the police as a concept of Rousseau's social contract. He argued that Aristotelian idea that the human being is a social animal was not valid for him, because he was not sociable but solitary, which is why he lived in a village with a dozen neighbors, and that the reality in which he lived is literary, not social. He claimed that he was not interested in politics, and that ideologies were the stiffening of ideas and made slaves. One way of thinking. He claims that the destiny of the people is rooted in history, the collective unconscious, the need for the sacred, the pedagogy of myths, the claim for excellence, and the existence of races. He also states that the reductio ad Hitlerum is an instrument of the current single thought to silence the heterodox. The expression reductio ad Hitlerum, or reduction to Hitler, is a fallacy originally created by the German Jewish political philosopher Leo Strauss, a professor at the University of Chicago, in which a point of view is refuted because it happens to be shared by Hitler. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.